Hello and welcome to Hare and the Hawthorn. My name's Kate Ray. I'm your host, and I am hosting my very brand new, Neil hates them, my pixie ears. Not just wearing them for aesthetics, they are my new setup. I did have a very large set of, they were just ridiculous, so I decided to go down the pixie ear route. They made an appearance on somebody else's podcast the other day, and everybody loved them. They really did. So no comments, please.
And no, I'm not getting a pair. No.
You've got to get a pair.
Not happening. No.
And a gnome hat, which would be brilliant. Before we get into today's topic and guest, I've got a special shout out. So I go out ghost hunting, and for those who don't know, I'm a paranormal investigator. And one of my teammates, Nikki, told me when we were at Shepton Mallet the other week that her mum is a massive fan of Hare and the Hawthorn and watches all our episodes and absolutely loves them and loves them when they come out. So big shout out to Jean, and thank you so much for watching. It did make me chuckle that I knew somebody whose mum was a fan. That's quite bizarre. Anyway, without further ado, I don't think we've got any other business to add before we get into today's episode, have we, Neil?
I don't think so. Let's go.
Oh no, we do need to briefly mention said goblet, Hare and the Hawthorn goblet, has been oh, it's there. I thought you put it in the cupboard.
No, it is there. So today, for one day only, one podcast only, there's nothing in the in the silver goblet. Samuel probably doesn't know what I'm talking about, but I always drink out this silver goblet, 17th century, brilliant, and so everyone's always very amused by that. But as we have an esteemed poet with us today, as Kate will explain in a moment, I have instead swapped to my Lord Byron mug, which well, we'll get onto that a little bit later, seeing we're talking poetry today. Go on, Kate.
So Neil was like a kid in the candy shop. We took him to Newstead Abbey, and obviously being all things Byron, he had to stop himself from breaking the bank and buying tea towels and t-shirts and all sorts. Just came out with a mug and a key ring, so bless him. Anyway, today's guest, I came across just doom scrolling on Instagram, and I'm quite blessed really. My Instagram, because of the algorithms, they work in my favor on this one, and it's usually a lot of beautiful artwork and lots of creative people on there. And this guy really stopped me in my tracks with a piece he did, a piece of poetry that he was reading about AI. And I was telling Neil before we came on and started recording that this particular poem, it was half a dozen times I listened to it, and it blew my mind. I'm not a poetry person. I haven't read much poetry since I was a teenager. I was very much into the beatniks at the time, and I don't know why, but came away from it. And I think it's definitely reawakened my love for poetry. So I want to welcome Samuel. Are we okay with Sam today? Can we?
Sam is fine. Yeah, absolutely fine. Go with Sam.
Sam. So we've got Sam Hurley, who you can find on Instagram. But today is his launch day for his magnificent book. I've had a sneak peek of a book of poetry that he's done, which is an anthem for the dreaming lost, which is a title that I know Neil is just going to go, yeah, love that title. It's definitely up his street. So thank you very much, Sam, for coming along and having a chat with us. And a lot of you may be wondering where this is going to go, and it's going to be really interesting. I know it is on the subject. So Sam, if you don't mind just kind of giving a brief bio and overview of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a poet and performance poet. Been writing poetry for forever. Sort of explain that at the beginning of my book in an abstract way. And on social media, sort of I'm a video first poet. So which is, you've seen my video, so I do performances, or I try and bring, because my style is quite abstract and leans more to the traditional way of writing on many of my pieces. So I try and bring that to a modern audience by creating, I suppose, little poetry cinematic vignettes, as a poetic way to put the videos. But I also write, I've written plays and film scripts and all bits like that. So yeah. I'm a father of two, and I live in a cottage, and I like to hike and be out in nature a lot of the time.
Absolutely perfect. So the poetry that we do see on Instagram that pops up, it very much, your videos are in tune with what you're talking about. It's very much a creative package. I'm sorry if you can hear kids next door. They've got an Olympic-sized swimming pool in school holidays, so it's lots of screaming, lots of squealing. So I do apologize about that. So the videos are captivating aesthetically to watch, and it's something that definitely draws you in, but the words are equally as captivating. And one of the reasons why I contacted you was it got me started to think about creativity and the liminal space in where that creativity lies. And definitely through your work, we get that sense of, because of the abstraction of it, that you keep having to delve in because it's not quite on an instant plane of understanding. How do you get yourself into that kind of mode to be able to write like that?
I think for me, I tend to start from a place of emotion rather than necessarily a time or place. So I will feel something, and then I'll go inward and go, well, what is that like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? I mean, I think all writers will tell you this, is no one really knows. It's very hard to explain that process. Stephen King talks about this in a really good way. He talks about having these little workmen in his head. He creates this, metaphor for it, because everyone feels like it comes from a different place, and everyone's process is very different. But it's quite hard to pin it to something. For me, I think my philosophy is that writers and poets are always writing. We're always responding to events, and it's happening on an unconscious level. And it's only when you sit down and you try and sort of organize that chaos, which I think is why people get better at writing poetry the more they write, because it's like a muscle. You're taking those abstract feelings, thoughts, scenarios, and you're working at the craft to put them into a sensible order, or disguise them with metaphor. I say disguise. I sort of believe that, like, poetry, like poetic license, is, you say you love someone. My love for someone is very different from your love for someone. So that's why we need metaphor, because you go down and you go back into and say, well, what does that feel like? And it's like, oh, well, it feels like, a fire in the sky, or it feels like, the breaking of ice over the Thames. And when we come into contact with metaphors that make sense to us, I think that's when you go, wow, yeah, that's I've found myself here. And I think Plato talks about that all learning is remembering. And I think poetry does that, and art does that, and music does that. It makes us remember something rather than learn something. I think I've answered that in a roundabout way.
Yeah,
that's great. I do like that, and you're right. It is Plato talking about remembering, and that's that suggests, the first thing that I always think about with that type of thinking about remembering is memory is like a Jungian, like a Carl Jung collective consciousness that you're plugging into. And certainly, I'm definitely not a poet, but I am a writer. And sometimes when I'm writing, especially the fiction, it seems to come from an abyss. It comes from nothing within my experience. People talk about, oh, you need to write about what's in your experience. Well, okay, that's a pretty good rule for most of the times, but sometimes the really special stuff comes out of nowhere. And, well, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of maybe your own subconscious, but I like to think that I'm plugging into collective consciousness, or unconscious, however you want to term it. Does that ring a bell with you?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm pursuing being a poet is because of Jung, and because of his theories on imagination and art and the collective unconscious, and this idea that actually every writer, not just me, I'm not special, but we're writing from a collective human experience. So the words that come to us aren't necessarily just our own anyway. So you almost have a duty, if you're brave enough to put them out there and to put them into form, because I think they belong to something, belong to everyone. And certain people are going to resonate with that, and certain people aren't going to find their meaning in your particular art or words. But yeah, I absolutely on board with that.
I think at the same time, though, it's very much that it is for everybody, but it is also a massive chunk of you, isn't it, when you do put it out there. And it's quite scary, because it is like, you know, I suppose putting out yourself in the rawest type of context to the world. And I know from, you know, doing bits of artwork and writing as well, that there's the imposter syndrome, and then there's B, the kind of fear, because it is a part of you that you are giving out. It's like no other job. It's like, well, it isn't a job, is it? It's more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly in today's age, you know, Byron's time, they would have had to deal with critics, as he did, but not in the immediate way that we do now. You put something out on social media and it takes, you know, Colin from Doncaster 2 seconds to come and tear it to pieces or whatever like that, and that can be very intimidating and scary, especially when it's something that you hold so dear. I try and have the philosophy that it's I'm not shirking responsibility, but it's not really mine once to put it out there anyway. I sort of step back and I go, okay, this person likes it, this person thinks it's ridiculous, or this person really loves it, and you know, I'll get messages or whatnot. But it belongs to something else. That's the only way I can survive, I think, on social media.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. And
Yeah.
I think everybody's an armchair critic, aren't they, on social media? And it's not necessarily those with any kind of background of knowledge, or it is just, it's such an instant world that it can be quite destructive if you take it to heart.
That's right, and well, you know, I haven't got. I will definitely get your book now that I know it's out. I will get it, but I haven't seen your book. All I've seen of your poetry is what I've seen you reading out on Instagram. Now, Instagram is not something I do. I have an account, but I don't like Instagram. I know what you say, Kate. If the algorithms work for you, okay, maybe. But I mean, that's a great way for a modern poet, despite what you've just been saying, Sam. It's a great way to actually breathe life into the poetry, because you know what it's like these days. Most people do not read poetry, but they'll be much more likely, I think, to listen to the spoken word. But there is sometimes a problem with that, in that whenever I see you know, something on YouTube, oh, there's a poem I like, someone, a trained actor is reading it out, and almost every time it's, you know, she walks in beauty like the night, and it's too sententious, it's too melodramatic and stagey and theatery. And when I watched you know, the poems that you're reading out on Instagram, it's very direct, it's very visceral, and you're kind of speaking just like you're speaking to us now. You're just reading out, and it helps that a lot of it is blank verse, isn't it? So it's much more you're able to convey it in a more conversational tone, which I really like. When you started putting your poetry on in Instagram as the spoken word with you just in front of a camera, why did you decide to do that? And how do you feel about doing that? Do you think you've been successful?
There's a few things there. So I've been doing this for 15 years. The first poem I put out there as a video was 15 years ago. It's only recent, but I would do it for a short period of time and then pull back and then delete my accounts and move on to other things. But I've been doing it for a long time, and I'd say the reason why I started doing videos is, one, I have a background in performance, and I've studied political speaking, and despite the accent and the mumbling and the absolutely awful diction, I've seen how powerful. So I've taught Shakespeare workshops. I've taught them in sort of rough areas in Manchester, which is originally where I'm from. And whenever I do a workshop, everyone would be, they had the back up against, I don't want to do Shakespeare. I don't want to do it. So I would do these workshops where we started with Shakespeare's insults. So we sort of make it like this rap battle. And as soon as these kids started to speak the words, as soon as they felt the power of that language coming through them, they got it. And so that's one of the reasons why I do lean on speaking poetry, because sometimes when you see it on a page, it can be quite intimidating, and it can seem quite flat. But I think, you know, poetry is music. It needs to be spoken. It needs to be sung. You know, whether that's in your head. But I mean, I encourage anyone to speak any poem out loud, and all of a sudden you can speak like Byron or Shelley or Keats or Wordsworth or Shakespeare. And for me, as a performer and someone who's taught people who are maybe adverse to sort of heightened language, at least, seeing that magic was something that I always wanted to do, and I've always felt a special connection to poetry, because it's been my way of emotionally connecting with the world. And then what did you say? What was the last part of your question? How successful has it been? Well, I sort of feel like I've shot myself in the foot with it in some ways, because writers, we're quite sensitive, we're quite private, even though we talk about all these, you know, deep feelings and these personal experiences. But for the most part, throughout history, writers have had this privacy of being a name on a book, and they can hide behind that. And now I've come along and I've built an audience of, you know, on my face. So there's days when I sort of go, I don't really want to, that isn't what I want to do. I don't want to sit in front of a tree and stare out moodily and mumble poetry. I want to just sort of write it and keep it in its book. But in terms of my goal of reaching a wider audience, it's been successful and very successful. I'm very, very grateful for anyone who, because I think a lot of people are like you, Kate, who don't read poetry, and probably wouldn't, or they've forgotten about it. It's forced down your throat at school. And I think a lot of the people who connect with my page, they connect with the videos, and then hopefully they then go on to sort of discover other poets, and you know, a love of lyric and rhyme, and and spoken word.
It's well, I'm delighted that it is successful, and it's certainly, it's you know, Instagram, social media, whatever, you know, it's got to be good for something, and it's definitely good for this. But you just, you know, obviously, you're saying, when did you start writing poetry?
Around the age of 5 or 6.
Right. So right.
When I say that, I wasn't sat there like Keats, you know, writing sonnets. It came from, and the poem at the start of my book, that's sort of explains this connection with, I feel all these immense feelings. And my dad used to, whenever we had a pet that died, he would go, right, you know, we need to write it a letter or a poem. And one of the first instances of that, my dad created this this myth of this fairy tree, because I was quite a shy boy and my rabbit had died, and I was, as you are when you first encounter a real grief as a child, sort of quite internalized it. And my dad encouraged me and my brothers to write to these fairies in this tree. And for me, that was the first connection with, like, these things I feel, these things I imagine, I can connect with them in this sort of like halfway mythical place. So yeah, at a young age, thanks to my dad encouraging us to write.
Are you happy to? Sorry, Neil.
Well, before, I know what you're going to say. So before we go there, I did say this to Sam before we started talking, but I am a total poetry snob, and basically anything later than the early 20th century, I'm just like, nah, not interested. If it's not Byron, Shelley, Keats, Coleridge, Tennyson, yeah, go for Tennyson, the Brontes, Thomas Hardy. This is what I love. I love the poetry, and I do find myself reading it out loud to myself. It's the way, exactly what you've just been talking about. That spoken word, it brings about a certain magic that isn't there if you're just reading it in your head. There's something about it. I've always done that. Why am I telling you about that? I'm a poetry snob. Oh, it's just, you know, segueing on from what you're just talking about, how long you've been writing poetry. Who are your influences?
It's changed throughout sort of I suppose age. Like when I was younger, you talk about like Ogden Nash and Purple Ronnie, and then sort of when I was a young man, like most young men, it was like Bukowski and Ginsberg and the Beat Poets, Plath and Hughes, and then sort of post sort of 20s, I've really got into the romantic poets. Actually, so when I was in primary school, sort of 8 or 9, I was gifted because I was gifted a book of, from a teacher gave me a book of, I think it was the Oxford Book of Animal Poems, and there's the Tiger was in there by William Blake. And before being a poet, I wanted to be a vet. So obsessed with animals, and I was obsessed with this picture of this tiger burning in the woods. I had no idea who Blake was, apart from this poem. And yeah, later on, sort of post sort of 21, I really got into the romantic poets. So Byron, Shelley, Keats, Coleridge, Wordsworth.
That's what we like to hear. Yeah, that's good. That's good. We did, again, dear viewers, we did agree before we came on air that Byron is number one, and that's it. Everyone else is sort of lower down the scale.
I obviously didn't graduate from the School of the Beatniks, so I got to Bukowski, and I think I killed all kind of wanting to go any further with that. I spent many years as a teenager sitting with the Beats, which was very unusual for a 13 or 14-year-old girl to be reading that crap. And I actually think that I didn't go any further because it was so depressed. By the end of my relationship with him, it was just like, no. I mean, Charles Bukowski, a 13-year-old girl, it's just... Yeah,
it's pretty deep.
It's pretty weird. I've got no idea why. I do want to move us on because I want to fit into this quite a lot. But actually, to start us off, I'm going to ask Sam to read us one of his poems. So I was really lucky to get a preview of the book. Which is jam-packed, absolutely jam-packed. And one of the things that I think was, because I am going to sell it out there for you, one of the things that I think is really sweet about it, other than the written word, is the delicacy of the illustrations in it is so sublime. They're so intimate and absolutely beautiful. So but the poem that he's going to read out is the one that you've just been talking about with your experience with the rabbit and the fairy door. Do you mind giving us a rendition of that, please?
Of course, yeah. Top points to everyone who sits through the entire poem. It's quite long.
They all will.
Okay. So it's split into parts, so I will say, the parts, so that it's time passing. Yeah. As a boy, I stood before a tree. 1. 6. I am shy, built like a secret, always looking for the music of a quiet room or the shadowed sympathy of a corner, somewhere to still my voice. I covet the soft language of animals and the earth. My best friend is a rabbit. Honey, our dialect is wordless, bright. At night when it rains, I sneak past my brother's beds and sit on the windowsill, watch stray cats zip like salt comets under cars, singe orange under streetlight, press my palm against the cool glass and the sorrow of the air. Everything is rhythmically sad. Some nights I steal downstairs and into the garden, take honey from her hutch, fall asleep as she chews through wires, wake to angry parents and a flickering house. 2. Honey is sick. She hides her body in the hay. She has long, shallow breaths. She refuses the carrots I give. Dad says she's dying, that she is old. He's wrong. Friends don't die. Yesterday she sat on my lap for an hour. Dad asks if I want to say goodbye. I slam the door. I hide in my room. Night comes. There are no stray cats, just bent, kind night. I look down to the hutch. In the morning, she will be okay. 3. In the morning, the hutch is empty. Dad says he is sorry. I ask where she is. He points to a box on the mantel. He asks if I want to see her one last time. I shake my head. He leaves the room. I stand in silence. I wait till I hear my father go upstairs. I grab the box on my bike. I zoom out of the house and into the woods. I skid and sit beneath a tree. I breathe. I wait. I hold the tragedy of the moment in the pearl of my throat. When I lift the lid, Honey will peer out, hop onto my lap, run about the field. She will be free. I shake. Lungs vibrate. I open the box. Death is for movies and video games. Death is pretend. Death is Sonic falling off a ledge and coming back to the start. Death is for old people, for relatives who never visit. Death is for vampires and goosebumps. Death is a show, a theatre, a play. It's squinting your eyes and lolling out your tongue in a game of war. Death doesn't come for rabbits, for friends, for the things a child loves. For we bury her in the woods. Dad says a few words. There's the green static of river somewhere through the tree, the rusty smell of a barbecue in the air. I can't find anything in my head to say. 5 weeks pass. The summer holidays come. No school. The garden is quiet. It's cracked tiles like a puzzle. The rain makes a soft buzz when it falls, like it's falling in a cup. There's a mangled sorrow to my head. The hutch is gone. There's yellow sour grass where it was. There's a silent clasp across life. It squeezes everything. 6 Dad takes my brothers and I out for a walk to the woods. He tells us he has a surprise, a secret. He's found something. We stop 10 minutes down the path at the foot of a dead tree. Crisp packets tackle nettle. There's a green gate 20 foot behind with a recently burnt sofa leant against the metal. In the distance, there's the muffled sound of a marriage breaking. Dad gets to his knees, gathers his boys around him, his usual theatrics. He talks about the legend of 3 fairies that live in this wood, in this dead tree. He points to a 6-inch arch, a hollow in the gash of the trunk. He says we should write to them, that they still live there, that if we write, they'll write us back. My older brother asks what to write. Dad says anything, that they know everything. They're magic. My brother's excitement is electric. I am silent. 7 My brothers write long, misspelled passages. They scrawl. I sit for hours, ashamed of the muddy nut my brain is. The words are jumbled, tangled in abstract specks and rushes of feelings too large for the throat. I write, I'm sorry, honey. I scrunch the paper into my pocket, strangling it like a neck. 8 We each stand before the tree. My eldest brother places his letter in first, then my younger brother, Tom. I step forward and pull the crinkled paper out from my pocket, chuck it through the gap like a cloud in the night. 9 A few days pass. We wait around the hollow trunk as Dad reaches inside. He pulls out a palm of tiny envelopes. 1 for my eldest brother, 1 for Tom, 1 for me. I hold it in my hand like holy parchment. The fairy wrote back. 10 There is a dull clunk of golf ball hitting club in the distance. They make little streaks in the sky as their plastic bodies curb sunlight. Down by the river, there's a group of old boys chucking bottles into the water. They make a burble pop, like the plug being lifted from bathwater. We sit at the top of a bank, above the residence of endless nettle and bramble. I look at the impossibly small writing on the paper. My eyes are swill with wet hope. My heart thumps like a rabbit's foot. The words are simple, astonishing. Don't be sorry. Honey had 3 carrots this morning. She's happy. She misses you. How old are you, Sam? 6, I say, to myself, to sorrow, to the broken heart, to the trapped language of my head, to imagination, to the bridge of brightening that has opened up, to thunder, to the rain, to the white-eyed poppet of the night, to the lonely hedgehog, the stray cat, the broken bottle, the burnt couch, to the little fairy in a tree. I'm 6.
That's lovely. Wow. Look at Neil's face. That's a good thing.
That's yeah, Lord Byron approves of that. It's that there's such a magical quality in it, and it's quite emotional actually, isn't it? It's just, you know, as soon as you touch on anything to do with death or grieving, whether it's a person, an animal, you know, I always, you know, churning up, just try. It's the deepest thing we can possibly touch, isn't it? And to render that in blank verse like that is, yeah, we're going back to talking about you're conjuring something up, although it's a very personal poem, obviously. There is a depth of quality in it that will resonate with anyone. Anyway, it doesn't matter whether you've never had a pet in your life. Everyone knows about grief. And when you've paired that with the magic of the fairies in the tree and the fact that you know, they've answered back, or they've supposedly answered back, you've captured a resonant magic. Well done.
Thank you.
Can I ask? I'm fascinated. When we were emailing backwards and forwards about you coming on Hare in the Hawthorn, you did speak about your dad, and I find it extraordinary and quite beautiful that you know, lads from Manchester are being given this kind of world of magic by their father, in probably a time in society when that's not really acceptable. It's quite a taboo thing. So my first question is about what did you think really kind of motivated your dad to have these experiences, or to create these experiences with you?
So my dad was a clown, a performance clown. So on one hand, not your typical father. Very big shoes. We had a normal car though. I think for him, he was obsessed with folklore and magic and wonder, and his dad was a locally respected musician. He played in the church. He played the church organ, I think. And I think for him it was important to always tell us that, you know, always show us that there's magic in the world. And as well, we were really poor, so we had to do something. You know, we didn't have holidays. We didn't have fancy things or, you know, toys. We had a very simple but very magical childhood. And a lot of it was outdoors, and a lot of it was encouraging to sort of interact with nature in a meaningful and an imaginative way. So I think his motivation was I think he wanted to instill something that maybe he was searching for in us, and not just me, in my brothers too. And I think, you know, I owe him a lot, because like you say, it wasn't typical. I can remember going through primary school and being absolutely proud of my dad being a clown. It was the best thing ever. As soon as I went to secondary school, you don't want your dad to be a clown in secondary school. That's rough, you know, because it isn't normal. It isn't, you know, it isn't until you're exposed to sort of the wider world that I realized like how lucky I was. Like, I wouldn't trade my childhood for anything, and we didn't have anything. And as a father myself, I take that on. So I'm infinitely grateful for that.
So the thing is, when you have those experiences, you forget about the toys you get at Christmas. You know, I can't remember any that really stand out. You know, you forget about the holidays, and perhaps the holidays were pretty shit anyway. But to be given the gift of magic and believing, and that is something that's not only you've not forgotten, but it's obviously very much shaped you as a human being in the world. And on that note, in terms of the world of the other and anomalous experiences, and magic, where are your beliefs? Where are your personal beliefs on those things?
So I 100% believe in spirit. I couldn't sit here and tell you what that was. I like to theorize, and I like to read a lot. And I've always been obsessed with ghosts and folklore and anything magical or esoteric. As I've mentioned previously when we were talking about Jung, I think so my theory goes into this space where perhaps a lot of the stuff that we talk about when we talk about this type of stuff is actually semantics. You know, I hear scientists talk about, you know, dimensions and time looping, and you know, but they wouldn't go anywhere near a fairy realm because that was too absurd. And to me, they sound very similar. They sound, you know, all these things sound similar. I just know what existence and what consciousness really is, and why it's here, and why we have it. I've had supernatural or experiences you could say were supernatural, or certainly out of the ordinary, and certainly when I was a child. And for me, I think I see the imagination as the collective unconscious. I see it as a superpower, as a bridge of brightening between the physical world and meaning and spirit and power and magic, and certainly wonder, because my poetry book, and I write a lot about wonder, because I think it's in those moments, that altered state where everything sort of flows, that we access something that is maybe not physical. And I don't believe that. I think there are two. You know, I think science is here, and then there's this world of wonder, or there's this that is separate. And I think the problem sometimes is that we're trying to science wonder, or we try and wonder science, and both those worlds coexist. It's you know, William Blake's dual sight. He talks about having a dual sight, which is, you know, you have to have a reason, and you have to have wonder, and you have to have, you know, and it's the lamb and the tiger he talks about, you know, in his poem The Tiger. It's having that innocence and experience and maintaining that. And I think when you see people who have that, and a lot of artists have it, for me, that's where magic exists.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think science has done well. You know, science is science. We owe our modern world to many hardcore materialist scientific ideas, but science has done humanity a great disservice in disconnecting us from spirit, or whatever you want to call it. You know, the other world, spirit, another dimension, the things that you're not allowed to talk about if you're a reductionist materialist scientist. We talk about this all the time on Hare and the Hawthorn, and you know, usually not very good terms in terms of what science has done, but it's taken us away. You know, I always go back to you know, Graham Hancock, the writer, the author and filmmaker, where and he's been in the Amazon jungle many times, and just one thing that's always stuck in my head is a conversation he had with a shaman, you know, a genuine shaman in the Amazonian jungle. And Graham Hancock says, the Western world is in a lot of trouble. Why are we in trouble? Why is this happening to us? And the shaman, simple reply, said, it's obvious. You have disconnected from spirit. And it's always stuck in my head. It's very simple, but it sort of sums up so much of our problems at the moment. The inability to see magic or accept it, because you've been indoctrinated by going to school and taught science. You know, you don't get taught folk tales in school these days. You might as a very little kid, but you know, you don't take it as a serious subject, and you certainly wouldn't be talking about paranormal stuff in school. So there you go. You go through the old school system, and by the time you come out, you've had it, unless you have some other people in your life, like your dad, Sam, for instance, or you know, or friends, family, or influences from wherever, that you could break out of it and realize that the creativity, your imagination, is a whole new world. It's the other world that you can bring into this world, and that's where it comes down to. You know, when I'm creating something, usually in writing, there's coming back to, we've gone back full circle to where we first started. There's a magic in it, a genuine magic. It's a magical ritual that I am, it's 300 words on a page. Well, so what? No, those 300 words are plugging into something that no one else has ever plugged into. So when you're writing a poem, you may have the influences and you may be using themes that other people have talked about before, but you're doing something, the poem you just read out, that's something that no one else in the history of humankind has ever encompassed into a work of literary art. And I think that is genuine magic. Is that not magic, Kate?
That is, and I'm just musing over you being super excited. It's nice to see.
Well, just in a moment you're going to get me reading out Byron. No, we won't
Anyway,
go there.
before we run out of time, I'm intrigued about personal experiences, and I know some that you've touched just on the surface of your own experience. Are you happy to talk about some of the anomalous things that have occurred?
Yeah, so I think sort of the one that stands out for me, and that is also in my book, it's called The Recurring Dream, is
Yes.
So I had this dream from about the age of 5 or 6 of I would be downstairs and I'd pick up the receiver, when we had actual house phones, and I would be listening to a voicemail, not a voicemail. What did we call them? Voicemails back then? What did we call them?
I think so.
Was it voicemails?
No, it was something recorded. Whatever, we know what you mean.
Yeah. But a voicemail, and I could hear myself speaking to another boy who I knew was my brother, and he was telling me that he had to go, and I would wake up crying. But it wasn't. I couldn't place it as, because my brothers were alive at the time, and I couldn't place it as one of my brothers. So I had this weird thing, and I'd have it repeatedly for years and years and years and years, until about the age of like 16, 18. And then sort of had it one last time about, I write this in the book, so I'm going to get it wrong, but like about 18 years old. And then sort of forgot about it. And then sort of 3-4 years later, my brother died. And it was a huge shock. And I remember being stood there and having to say goodbye to him in the hospital, and just, it was almost like deja vu, like I'd done this before. And then a few years after that, I had the dream again, but this time I was saying goodbye to him, but he was telling me that he was okay. And then almost 10 years to that date, in the same hospital, on the same day, on October the 13th, at the same time, my firstborn son came into the world.
Wow.
So
there's a whole lot to unpack in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, what were your I'm sure you've mulled it over, your theories about do you think that was something sort of preparing you, your dream was preparing you for it, or
so I don't believe in fate. I'm not someone who believes in fate or destiny. I think it can be quite an insidious concept. Why am I here, and why is there a child who's got brain cancer? I don't believe I don't believe anyone's fated to live misery. I believe maybe in omens, and like you say, maybe being aware of something. So my little brother was disabled, and he spent a lot of time in the hospital when he was young. He was born with 3 holes in his heart, like 20% lung capacity, and he had scoliosis, so a bent spine. And I think from a really young age, I was quite aware of. I'm someone who's I've only really realised it since becoming a father, but I'm very paternal. Like, I like to look after people. I like to care for people. And I think that sort of, as a man, you don't sort of recognise what that is in your early in your childhood and teens. It's just this thing. So I think maybe it was an awareness of perhaps this is going to happen. and it's going to happen at some point, because he was never going to live to 60, you know. But I mean, he should have lived longer than he did. But I do think there is something guiding there. Like, I think maybe preparing, and certainly the fact that I had this dream, you know, consistently, and then it stopped, and then it came back again, and then my son was born on the exact same day, at the exact same hour, in the exact same hospital.
That's got to be been a really bittersweet moment, though, that, hasn't it? If you know your son's born on that date.
I would say, you know, first, you know, I didn't know anything about that until you said that. So, you know, I'm really sorry to hear about your brother. But the synchronicity of your child being born, that's pretty impressive synchronicity. Just one thing, just tapping in. Obviously, you're talking about the recurring dream there. Do you think that, whatever we want to call it, the collective unconscious, the other worlds, a magical realm, do you think that dreams have special access for us to that kind of different reality? Do you think dreams are a special interface?
Some, certainly, yeah, I would say so. At the very least, they're at that point of poetry where everything is abstract, to make sense of meaning. But I certainly think that, because I've had too much time, there's not enough time to go into this now, but I've had other dreams and other experiences, and around the point of my brother's death, I had a slew of really strange dreams and really strange experiences, like a lot of OHS, you know, old hag syndrome. I had a weird experience with a Ouija board. I'd gone on a ghost hunt, and whether it's looking back and sort of trying to make sense of everything, but there was certainly sort of some locus of strangeness going on around preceding my brother's death and afterwards.
I think it becomes a time where things, you know, the boundaries do thin, and whether that is just on a psychological level. But the fascinating thing about when you have reoccurring dreams is they literally repeat verbatim when that happens, and it's something that's undeniable, because it's dreams don't do that. You know, dreams will go off into all different. You can have dreams that have similar feelings to them, and especially if you're sort of qualifying that dream with other strange occurrences that are going on around that time, it just begs the question of what is going on, you know. Is it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So you just meant, and I know I could chat with you about ghost hunting and all sorts, but so spirit board work, Ouija board work, is something that a lot of people won't actually do. How did you find that? Was that the first time you'd used a Ouija board, or?
Yeah, it was the first time.
Wow.
And I didn't want to do it, because I've always believed in that sort of stuff, and you know, I know you've got to be careful. And it was on a ghost hunt, and I spent a few months just feeling weird anyway. You know, just off and just sort of just a bit extra sensitive or whatnot. And we'd gone on this ghost hunt, and people were doing, you know, all sorts of, you know, the spirit cameras, and there was a Ouija board going on, and I was encouraged to sit down. And about 2 weeks before, I'd had an old hag syndrome, where this woman had stood over my bed, and she spoke to me, like, very briefly, but it was the most terrifying experience I'd ever had. If anyone's ever had old hag syndrome. And so I sat down. So this was like 2 weeks later, and I sat down at this Ouija board, and there was a few friends there. So I was like, oh, you know, I don't, you know. Anyway, it kept. There was a medium sort of overseeing it, and it kept coming back to me that this spirit wanted to talk to me. I was like, I don't really like this, and it'd been giving off sort of messages, you know, words, whatnot before. And it said, well, and so the lady said, well, you know, we'll ask it a question, but ask it a question in your head. Because I've got a woman here who wants to speak to you. And I'm going, oh, it's 2 weeks on from this. woman trying to speak to me in this dream, in this sleep paralysis. So I thought, you know what? I think my friends are messing with me. It's been picking out words like, just your generic hellos, and up until, I've been there because I've been watching it. So I said, okay, you know what? I'll ask this question in my head. So I said, tell me an important date. And it shot towards, it not pointed at numbers before this, it shot straight towards a number. And I just stood up and got out, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. What that number would have been, I don't know. But yeah, that was strange. And it made me feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Spirit board work, I always say that it's like dialing a random number and you never know who you're going to get on the other side of the phone. It's there can be a queue of all kinds of different energies and entities waiting on the other end of the line, waiting to pick up. And I've never been on the board where it hasn't been tricksy, to say the least. It's very rarely a positive experience. Interesting though, definitely an interesting one. So you say about the Hag experience. My first thought was, oh, that sounds like Banshee. That does. That sounds, along those lines with the kind of, they come around with death. They sort of they linger about with death. And
where you went with that incident, you say it was a genuine sleep paralysis. Were you generally sort of tied to the bed when it happened, as is usual with sleep paralysis?
Yeah, so I've had sleep paralysis. I get it quite frequently. I've had old hag syndrome twice. So yeah, it was the typical, your eyes are open, it's not a dream because you're looking around the room, and you're terrified because you can't move. But on this occasion, there was this woman. I say woman, it was like a dark shape, but it felt like a woman, instinctively. And she walked up to the side of my bed, and I was trying to scream out I was living at home at the time. I was trying to scream out for my older brother, who was in the opposite room but couldn't. And she said, she put her hands on my chest and said, "Don't worry, you can't argue with 1,000 years of progress." And then I woke up. So I don't know what that means.
Fucking hell, excuse my French. Jesus, that, just the most terrifying moment, and then something that profound. It's not like, don't worry, we're all going to die soon or something like that. But what? That is crazy.
I have no idea what that was supposed to mean.
That could be interpreted in many ways, couldn't it?
Definitely. I mean, I've experienced sleep paralysis. I've only ever had it twice, and mine's male. It's a 6 foot plus male shadow figure. That's a watcher that just stands and stares, and it's absolutely petrifying when it happens. Petrifying, because you can just about move your eyeballs and that's it. It's crazy stuff. Anyway, I'm very, very mindful of time, and we could go into all kinds of paranormal realms and scare the bejesus out of Neil. Go on, Neil. You want?
Well, before we go, we do need, because I'm not going to put this on Kate and say that she's really bad at putting things.
I will remember
putting
the
links.
I will remember the links.
Kate's going to remember, but in case she doesn't, one or other of you got the book, got Sam's new book. Have you got it nearby that you can just show on the screen?
Do you know what? I don't actually have a copy of it myself yet. I've got an older copy.
Oh no.
I've only got it on PDF, so I can't show it on PDF.
Here we go.
So there's a proof version of it. So it's exactly the same as that, but it's a proof I had the other day. So it's an anthem for the dreamer lass.
Can you just show us? Are the illustrations in that one in the proof? I love them. They're so sweet.
A few of them are. So
did you do those?
Yeah. So I up until recently I was a graphic designer. So they're not hand drawn illustrations. So what I've done is I've created graphics. So I've taken photos and mixed them together to create sort of, I suppose, an emotional sentiment of what each chapter sort of contains. So yeah, so I put them together, but they're not hand drawn.
They are so sweet. There's such an innocence about them, and they're lovely, and a quirky, quirky element to them. I was particularly drawn to.
Well, thank you.
To them, and I can't wait to get a hard copy. I'm definitely going to be buying one for today being the launch day. So
and I will certainly buy it, and hopefully viewers will be inspired to buy an Anthem for the Dreaming Lost. I mean, that title is you've stolen that title from the next novel. That would have been a great one. But that's absolutely brilliant. And of course, what's the Anthem, First World War, Wilfred Owen?
Doomed Youth.
Anthem for Doomed Youth. It's sort of, obviously it's not the same, but it's
it's the same.
certain resonance that comes from that. And anyone who's read Wilfred Owen or any First World War poetry will kind of it's not similar to what Sam's doing, but there you can get there's just some resonance from that type of poetry. The very sad and beautiful kind of poetry that you got from those first, Sassoon and Owen and those poets. See, Butterworth is the other one, isn't he? And you will find that in Sam's poetry in spades. I can thoroughly recommend it, and I think that's the first time I've ever thoroughly recommended a 21st century poet to anyone.
Well, I appreciate it.
Absolutely fantastic stuff, and I will be buying that book now that I know it's out today. Thanks, Sam.
And where can we buy the book? Where can we get it from?
Amazon. So it's globally on Amazon. Yeah. So.
And if people want to contact you and see your work, where can they find you?
Best place on Instagram. I am on TikTok as well, and it's Samuel.Hurley on both of those. Yeah.
Brilliant. Anything else you want to say, Neil, before we
just get yourself over to oh God, I can't believe I'm saying that as well. Get yourself over to Instagram. Get yourself over to Instagram. Don't look at all the other rubbish. Just go straight to Samuel.Hurley, and you will find. I mean, there's dozens of read poetry there, isn't there? Dozens of videos.
Yeah, there's quite a bit there. Yeah.
And you will not regret it, because it's really worth it, and you will hear Sam. Well, you've seen Sam reading out his poetry today, and that's how he reads it out. And I love that style, that kind of just bass style. Based, shouldn't say bass these days, should I? But you know what I mean. It's that nice visceral low tone that you're able to render your poetry in, and I'm sure anyone who goes over there and listens to it will buy the book.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All I've left to say is I kind of forgot we've been recording for about the last half an hour or so. That's a brilliant thing. So thank you so much, Sam, for joining us and your time.
Thank you for having me.
It's been wonderful, and I'm sure we can get you back at some stage and
absolutely
talk more paranormal and poetry, which is definitely two things that should be out there more often. Paranormal and poetry.
I agree.
Yeah,
and so does Lord B.
So thank you all very much for watching, and we'll be back soon with more guests around fairies and paranormal. I'm sure there'll be more future episodes with just Neil and myself whittering on about subjects that are particularly annoying us at the time, or bothering us, or I'm still yet to do Jeff the Mongoose. I have decided that I'm going to set down that gauntlet for Neil. I may do it on my own and then challenge him to come back and tell me he still doesn't like the Jeff the Mongoose case. And I have had a positive response, Neil, to my shout out about that. So no comment. Without further ado, I'm going to say thank you very much to both of you, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye.